How can I know God is real? That's an important question, isn't it? And you might be watching today because it's your question. Out of the vast array of things that are possible to believe today, what is it about the Christian claims that makes it more credible than any other worldview? I'm reminded of the 2015 NRL Grand Final. At full time, you might remember, it was a tie. It was a game between the Broncos and the Cowboys, and a last-minute try had been scored to equal the scores at 16 all. Well, Jonathan Thurston was set to convert the try. He took his time. Tension was building. The crowd was on its feet. The coaches were nervous. He kicked. It looks good. It looks very good, except right at the last minute, it swerves and hits the goalpost. No conversion. Scores all 16 all at full time. Well, why am I telling you this? Because of what one of the Channel 9 commentators had to say about that. One of the commentators, I forget which one it was, said this: "One day I'm going to interview the football gods and ask why they didn't allow Thurston his moment of glory in converting that try." And I thought to myself, what? Football gods are in charge of conversions of tries? Why didn't anyone tell me that before? I never knew. Well, what is it that makes us think that Christianity has any more credence going for it than the Channel 9 commentators' theory about football gods? Well, here's what I want to put to you today. I want to confess that it may sound incredible to you, but here's how I think we can know God is real. Because he turned up here. Because he turned up. I have absolutely no evidence that football gods control the outcome of try conversions. But I have loads of historical evidence to point to the fact that God turned up here in the person of Jesus Christ to reveal himself to us and to show us that he's real. I want to point out to you from those first 4 verses of Luke's Gospel that were read for us that Christianity is biographical, it's historical, it's biblical, and it's personal. So first of all, Christianity is biographical. The Christian faith rests on the birth, life, teaching, miracles, death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus. Have a look with me again at what we read in those opening verses. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. And then he adds in verse 3, I too decided to write an orderly account for you. See, there's been other accounts of Jesus, the author says, but on the basis of my investigations with eyewitnesses, I decided to write an orderly account. Now, Christianity is unusual amongst the religions of the world in that it revolves around a person. Compare it to other religions. Hinduism, for example. Hinduism is about eternal wisdom. That is what Hindus believe their faith is about. Not a person, but eternal wisdom. Or take Islam. If you were here 2 weeks ago, we saw that the whole word Islam means submit. Their religion is about how to submit to Allah. Or Buddhism, at first it might seem that it's about a bloke named Buddha, but Buddha himself told people not to attach themselves to him, that he's only just a means of a boat getting to the other side, if you like, and that to continue to hold on to him would hold you back for the rest of your life. That's about the complete opposite of what Jesus says, because he wants us to be intimately connected to him in a relationship of dependence and love with him. That's why Christianity is unlike any other religion, and why our founding texts are not books of law or philosophy or mystery or ritual. They are biographies about Jesus, who walked planet Earth in the first century. Susan and I have a friend in Vancouver in Canada, and she tells the story of how she encountered Jesus somewhere between her first and second glass of wine and the first and second chapters of John's gospel. And now she's a huge fan and a devoted follower. She read the biography of Jesus and she was convinced. I hope that if you're a guest of someone here this morning, and perhaps you know very little about Christianity, that you might start with a cup or a glass of something that you like to drink, and a session or two reading one of the 4 Gospels of Jesus, because you will meet Jesus there, and you'll begin to be able to weigh up for yourself whether or not this is for real. So that's the first and foremost thing about Christianity. It is biographical. Secondly, it's historical. Back to our verses. Many have undertaken to draw up an account, that word refers to history, of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses. That's another historical term. Therefore, verse 3, since I have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, ... more historical terms. This is history he's writing. It's not invented, it's not created, it's not made up. Let me show you a little later in this same gospel, the Gospel of Luke in chapter 3, where Luke ties the story of Jesus into precise historical context. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, we know exactly when and where that is, when and where he ruled, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, we know exactly when and where that is also, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene. We know all about these characters and places from secular historical documents. And what I want to point out is that there is no way that the story of Jesus was ever meant to be read as legend or parable or metaphor or spiritual event that didn't take place in time and space. No, the author ties his account of Jesus into precise time and place. And the fact that Luke carefully researched those who were eyewitnesses tell us that his work was probably finished within 20 or 30 years of the time Jesus was around. Otherwise, the eyewitnesses would have been dead. Now, this is fascinating when compared to other works of history which no one ever thinks to question. For example, Alexander the Great. He had a massive kingdom 3 centuries before Jesus. His first biographical account doesn't occur until 140 to 150 years after he was around. But the best account, regarded as the most significant and authoritative, is by Arrian 400 years after Alexander is dead. Luke, by comparison, is so close to the events he is personally aware of and knows of the eyewitnesses. Friends, Christianity is not based on a lone spiritual insight or a mystical story of dictation to someone under a tree. It is not once upon a time in a land far and far away stuff. It is based on historical events in real time, recorded by a multiplicity of witnesses close in time to the events. So Christianity is biographical, it's historical, and thirdly, it's biblical. Now you might say, well, that's a pretty weird thing to say, Mark, that it's biblical. But what I'm trying to point out here is actually pretty simple, that all the biographies tell us about Jesus are not simply a series of historical events, though they certainly are that, but it's actually the turning point of a long history of God's dealing with his people. Luke says, if you recall, many have undertaken to draw up account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. He understands that the history of Jesus is part of a bigger story, a larger history, that it in fact fits with the first part of our Bibles that we call the Old Testament. This is crucial to understanding where Jesus fits. It's crucial to understanding Christianity. You will find it all the way through Luke's Gospel. So when Jesus gets up in chapter 4, verse 20 to give his first sermon, he reads from one of the scrolls of the Old Testament, and he says that the words that he's reading have been fulfilled right there and then. That is, what was being talked about in the Old Testament is being lived out by Jesus in history in the first century. At the end of Luke's Gospel, Jesus' last words to his disciples after his resurrection are, "This is what I told you when I was still with you, that everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the Psalms and the prophets," that is, our Old Testament. You won't fully understand the story of Jesus until you get something of the backstory. God turning up in Jesus in first century was part of God's grand plan to address the evil of the world and was around 2,000 years in the making. So Jesus turning up is massive. It is the turning point of history. It's the centerpiece of God's plans. So Christianity is biographical. Christianity is historical. Christianity is biblical in that it fits with all that we read in the Old Testament prior to Jesus turning up. And finally, Christianity is personal. Did you notice again how Luke opens his account? He says, I've written this orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. Now, we don't know who this Theophilus is. It wasn't uncommon for historical works to be dedicated to important people. But note that Luke wants Theophilus to know the certainty of the things that he's been taught. The certainty of the things that he's only heard rumours about or heard the beginnings of. That's the sense in which Luke uses this word. And certainty, that particular word, means security and dependability and certainty and stability. It's the idea that something is really solid. In fact, we get our word asphalt from that word. So Luke wants Theophilus to know that there's something solid, dependable, certain about the account of Jesus he's going to give. It's something Theophilus can depend on, count on, something you can depend on and count on. There may be some people watching here today, listening, who have known very little about Jesus, not a lot, but you do have a hunch that there's something to life more than what meets the eye. You have a hunch that there's more to life than your career or investments, something more than even your family. I want you to know the certainty of the things about Jesus that you have heard in times past. I want you to know it's for real. There was a guy at Noosa early on in my time who asked me, are you saying, Mark, that Jesus Christ was a real person? And I said back to him, absolutely. That was news to him. Maybe that's news to you today. Christianity is personal. It's actually for you, and it will make a difference in your life, a real difference. You may have heard me mention before that there was a couple in my church in Noosa who had been in and out of church all their lives, but hadn't really clicked with Jesus. But once they began to understand how much God loved them, how real Jesus is, that Christianity is more about what God has done for them than what they do for him, that they can be assured of their forgiveness and eternal life because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. You know what their reaction was? Why hadn't anyone told me this before? I don't want you to get to the end of your life and say, why didn't anyone tell me about Jesus before? I'm telling you now. You can count on it. Jesus is for real. He died and rose for you, and he loves you. How can we know God is for real? Because he turned up. And if Jesus is for real, if Jesus is God turned up on earth, then that has to mean that he's a lot more important than the occasional thought most Australians give. I want you to be certain about him. He wants you to be certain about him. If it is true, it's the most important piece of information you can have in understanding life today. If it's not true, however, then it is completely irrelevant. Forget it entirely. How do we know God is real? He turned up in the real person of Jesus Christ, who really walked this planet 2,000 years ago. How do we know that? Because of the primary documents, the New Testament Gospels, which are biographical, first and foremost about a person, the person of Jesus. Historical, they're from eyewitnesses, and they're grounded in places and times and places that we can validate from other historical sources. They are biblical, they fit with the whole pattern of the Bible and God's plans and purposes for all time. And they're personal, they're for you, that you may have certainty about Jesus and about God, and therefore connect with him in a real and personal way. Will you test the history of Jesus? Will you be at least open to the possibility that this may be a lot more significant than you have figured so far? Will you consider taking my Jesus Explained course, the 4 Tuesdays in July at either 4 p.m. or 7:15 p.m, so that you might inquire and explore further about who Jesus is and why he came? And look, if you're here today and have known Jesus all your life and are completely convinced about these things, then I want to urge you to keep close to him and to keep being informed about Jesus, so that if you can ascertain and grasp the historical reliability of the Gospels, of the New Testament documents, then you may be used by God to point other people to the life, the joy, the peace that we share in Jesus too. Amen.